Sounds great. Why don't we kick off our presentation, and we would invite you to be very active in the chat as we're talking through everything that's in this demonstration. We'd be glad to answer questions as we go. Kevin?
All right, give me a second here.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's session entitled Migrating a 20-Year-Old Perl Application to Drupal. My name is Chris Brady. I am the Partner Alliance Manager at Volir. Volir is a full-service digital agency based in Boston, Massachusetts. I'm pleased to be joined by Kevin Quillen, our Drupal practice lead and a longtime contributor to the Drupal community. Now, every good story needs a hero, and today I'd like to introduce you to our hero in this session, the National Bureau of Economic Research. Founded in 1920, NBER is a private, nonprofit, nonpartisan research organization dedicated to promoting a greater understanding of how the economy works. NBER has been the home of 32 Nobel Prize winners in economics, and all of these smart folks generate a lot of content. More than 1,200 working papers are published annually, and they have web content going back decades on the website. To manage this large content volume, NBER created a custom Perl application 20 years ago to enable the submission of working papers and other content to the organization. This application is still running, but NBER recognized the need to evolve this approach and enable their digital transformation. They also needed a refreshed user interface, one that is fully responsive, accessible, and modern. On the right, you can see a screenshot of some of the new design system in use. Having a beautiful modern website is great, but they also needed the right content management system to power this new vision. They selected Drupal, of course. Now, you might not be an economic powerhouse like NBER, but we hope that you will find some practical tips and techniques that you can take back to your organization and use right away. I'm going to turn this session over to Kevin to walk through his methodology and give you practical advice that you can use today. Kevin, over to you.
Thanks, Chris. Hey, everybody. This is Kevin Quillen, the Drupal practice lead at Volir. Delighted to be here today at DrupalCon, talking to you about a recent project we completed for the National Bureau of Economic Research. And we're going to be talking about how we migrated them off of their original Perl application that powered their website into Drupal. So when we took this project on, we had two major challenges from a development standpoint that we needed to solve to make this project a success. And we had to migrate over 100,000 published items of content and nearly 35 gigabytes of documents and images over into Drupal 8. At the same time, we had to make sense of the content in the old database and formulate that into content types and media types and taxonomy in Drupal 8. And we had to do this in a way where we were migrating every single day. This was not a one-time or a one-off migration. This was going to be a daily event for us. So knowing that, we needed to sit down and devise a way to move and migrate all this content and data from the old MySQL database over to Drupal 8. And before we could even really do anything in Drupal, before we try to create content types and try to create taxonomy vocabularies and get lost configuring all sorts of things that we think we need to do, every migration, regardless of its size, begins with a migration plan. We need to know what we're doing before we can commit to it in Drupal. And we do that because as developers, we always have this inclination to want to jump right in and start doing configuration and start doing coding around problems that we know we need to solve. We want to get there and want to look and feel as cool as this race car racing to the finish line on different features that we need to complete. And everyone wants a smooth and painless migration. Everybody wants us to succeed and go well. But if we don't sit down and do our due diligence and be thorough and do our planning, instead of looking like this race car looks, it's going to go something like this. We're going to get all of our content and all of our data that we think we need to migrate onto our barge here, and suddenly everything's going to go sideways and we're going to get stuck. Then we're going to feel like that dozer, little tiny dozer to the side of the boat there in the corner trying to dig us out of this situation. And migrations can definitely go this way. If you don't sit down and plan them out and kind of consider how the content is related to one another, what consequences may arise from choosing one field type over another, as you'll see later when we talk about search. We don't want to end up in a situation like this, right? So by sitting down and doing our due diligence and being thorough and creating spreadsheets, we can really create really good migration paths and migration plans this way. And this also enables the greater team to take part and sit down and fill in these spreadsheets of the data that we are going to need to facilitate creating the new website. And we also sat down with subject matter experts at NBER and got their input on different types of content. There was only so much that we could derive from the information architecture and the content strategy and the wireframes that we could visually see. There was also a good amount of information that we couldn't see behind the scenes that we would need to migrate in to power these new displays and to power the content and power the searches that we were going to build. Let's talk a little bit about what a migration is. Maybe you haven't done one before in Drupal 8 or Drupal 9, and you're wondering what makes up a migration or the anatomy of a migration. Migrations can be performed from a variety of sources. Most people probably do assume that you could do it from MySQL into Drupal, since it's one of the most common database technologies out there. But you'd be surprised to know that migrations can be performed from any of these technologies. There's SQLite, MS SQL, PostgreSQL. You can even do Java Content Repositories or JCRs, CSV, JSON, XML files. You can do SOAP and REST APIs, and you can even migrate from static HTML files. You could, for instance, migrate from a static Hugo or Jekyll blog or Gatsby-based website with that static generated output into Drupal. And since Drupal can support numerous sources for migrating data into, it makes the migration system in Drupal very flexible and very powerful. So in our case for the NBER, we were going to migrate from a MySQL source. That's what their legacy applications is built on, so we figured that's what we were going to do. But this presented a lot of logistical problems for us. The MySQL databases are gigabytes in size, and in order to get it where we needed it to go, we would have to take a backup of that database and rsync it to our web server, and then we'd have to rewrite all these SQL queries that are written in Perl to generate the result sets that we would need to perform the migrations. And this was cumbersome because I didn't want to have to write all those SQL queries again from one language to another. There's things that can get lost in translation there. And we'd be writing code that's just coupled to the other application. If the other application needed to make changes to their MySQL queries, I'd have to mirror those to reflect that so we all have accurate data. And we'd have to do this every day. So we don't want to have to do a backup and restore of this every day. It was just going to be very cumbersome to do. So then we thought about, well, what if we expose this as a REST API? The migration system can support fetching data from a REST API. What if we did that? Well, this solved all of our problems besides the part where it still takes the MySQL queries that we need take a nominal amount of time to execute. And in some cases, it can take 10 minutes. In some cases, it took upwards of 45 minutes. And while that's okay for the MySQL server, it's not okay for a web application or open HTTP connection to wait for a response that long. It's just not going to be open longer than 60, 90 seconds, whatever the web server is configured to do for a timeout setting. So we thought, okay, well, how do we solve this final remaining problem? Well, we had an idea to create a couple more REST API routes that would generate JSON files based on those MySQL queries. So instead of using the REST API to fetch data on demand, we used it to initiate some jobs in the background that would kick off the MySQL query and then eventually write to JSON files on disk. And then we would take those JSON files and rsync them back to our web server every single day. And these JSON files would serve as the basis for our migrations that we were going to do every single day. And now we didn't have a problem running these migrations. We didn't have to wait for MySQL or wait for a response on an open connection. We could pick up the file, parse it, and start working right away. And a migration definition is really made up of three key areas. There's the source, which tells Drupal where it's from, a destination to tell Drupal where it's going, and the process section, which tells Drupal what to do with the data that we have from our source. And we can map fields from the source to named items used later in the process section, which we'll look at here in a bit. But our migration definitions are all in YAML, YAML-based configuration files. In this example here, you can see our source section is defined, and we're telling this migration that the data for the source lives in a file in the private file system in the working paper.json file. And we want to iterate over this data using the JSON plugin to look at our source fields. And the destination tells Drupal where to create this record. And in this case, we're creating a working paper node. And from the fields section of our source, like we just mentioned, we can map them to Drupal fields in our process section. As we can see in this example here, we're doing some simple mappings of text-based fields. And we can also use multiple stages or pipelines and alter and change the data to make it suitable for storing in a Drupal field. We don't have to, we're not forced to use just text-based values to text-based fields. We can add as many pipelines, process pipelines as we refer to it, per field to get data massaged and moved into a format that Drupal needs. You can see in this picture on the right, these are some more complex examples of migrating data into entity reference fields, taxonomy fields, and some paragraph fields, where we're using a couple different custom plugins to take the data and get it into a format that we need so Drupal will store it correctly. Okay, so let's demonstrate and see this in action. What we're going to do here is look back at our migration definition and take an example working paper and walk you through what a migration looks like for NBER, and also some of the enhancements we did to the backend interface to really aid this process. We are, again, running migrations every day, so it's important for us to have the process hammered out and also provide tools for all the users at the NBER to validate and help update the data as they see fit. So first, let's jump back in and take a look and review our migration definition from the earlier slides. This is the very YAML file that we saw earlier in the talk with all of our fields and sources laid out here. And this is our JSON file. We have an example working paper. Normally this file has about 30,000 items in it, but for the demonstration's sake, we're going to do one item. So I can show you a couple things that we're doing here with the migration process. So if I go back into Drupal, I go back into our backend here. I go to the migrations section. Open up our working papers migration. And just run the migration. So we actually have this in our system already. So it just ran an update against that item. If I go to our content area, I can see that this was the last updated item. And this is our working paper here. Great. So let's assume a couple different problem scenarios, right? What if we received our data at midnight and there's something wrong with that data, although we didn't know about it at the time? So if we can simulate that by going in here. Let's say somehow the node title got messed up, which I can simulate by just changing it like this. Looks like I'm trying to exit Vim. So we'll go back into Drupal. Now, if I run this migration, whether the migration ran at midnight, since we are running these daily, or if I run this from the interface, we're going to wind up with a serious problem. So one updated again. So if I go back to my content area, oh no, this very important paper by a very important author is now messed up. What do we do? How do we get this resolved? Well, no amount of running that same migration is going to resolve this until the upstream data is corrected and those files are regenerated. And that only happens once a day at midnight, and we can't afford to wait that long. So we built some additional things in the interface here to kind of help alleviate that problem. We also built these additional tabs to help people not have to use tools like Postman and curl to query the external system. So if you remember from earlier in the talk, we mentioned this REST API that we implemented it here in a couple of these tabs here. So the first one I'm going to look at is this response tab. And this is just a simple controller on any of the entity forms that we're migrating. And it generates, the request URL that generates the data. It's the same URL that is used to generate our migration JSON files. But this is actually going to do a live query against the legacy application using Guzzle and return, the response from that system in JSON format, which is the same format that we get in our migration files. So from here, we know by looking down at the title that, okay, this is the correct title. This is what it should be. Or, if any of our fields are messed up, we can see what they should be here and get them corrected. So now that we have this, how do we get this back in the system without waiting until midnight? Well, we also built a tab here called Update Item, which presents a confirmation form. And what's going to happen when I click Confirm is it's going to execute a migration using that same migration definition that we saw in the YAML file. But there's one additional change here. So if I hit confirm, okay, so it's updated our title. And if I go back to the node edit form, our title is indeed what it should be. How did we do that? Well, since we're leveraging that REST API and it's returning JSON to us, we can actually instantiate an instance of the migration plugin and give it our migration ID, which is the working paper migration YAML. But then we can go through and actually change properties of that definition in this instance that we're using. And instead of using the URL to the private file, we're actually passing it that HTTP URL that we saw on the Drupal screen, and we're changing our data fetcher plugin from file to HTTP. And what that does is this tells the migration to execute that request and use the response as the source data. But everything else stays constant, right? Since it's the same format our JSON file is in, everything else about our YAML definition stays the same because it doesn't know that it's coming from a different source, but the data is still the same, so all the mappings still work. And this is how we were able to hook up the backend to query the legacy application live and help fix any problems that we see like that. Maybe the data is wrong, maybe somebody made a mistake while they're editing a node, because we do have fields on these nodes that are not migrated that users can edit to. Maybe they, if you do it from here, make a mistake, and I don't realize it, and I click save because I'm editing paragraphs, and it's like, oh no, I've messed something up. There's no worry because now we can go back and we can just edit the node again, and we can just quickly validate again what's in our legacy system or our upstream data. That's the title. Okay, so I can run this update. I can confirm it. Great. And we see the title is fixed again. So that was just one example of one of the migrations that we're running every day. We're pulling new data in, we're putting it on our web server where Drupal resides, and then we're running these migrations at midnight. And we're doing this for 14 different content types. We're doing it for users and taxonomy terms and media. And the result of that is we're able to pull over 100,000 entities, and we keep them updated every night. There are cases where the content is constantly being updated in the legacy system, even if it's 5, 10, 15 years old sometimes, as new content comes in. We want to make sure we get that synced. We're also pulling along its meta tag data, any vanity URLs and redirects related to that content. So at this point, we're pretty in sync with what the upstream system has. As a result of being so thorough in the migration planning process, we now have all that content in Drupal across all those entity types in well-defined fields. And what do we do from here? Well, of course, we can make it searchable, right? That's one of the things we had to do. And to enable this, of course, we use the great Search API and Search API Solr module for Drupal 8. Let's take a look at what searching is like on the actual website. We're going to look at the site-wide search and then a couple of extra search-related features that we built for the content editors at the NBER to really put the power of search in their hands. So let's just take a look at the backend really quick for the configuration of Search API so you can have an idea of what we're talking about when it comes to doing searches of this size. We'll go to Search API and we'll look at our index here. Take a look at the fields. Okay, as you can see, we have a lot of fields here that we are indexing into Solr. And all these fields are, of course, fields that we are storing in Drupal from the migrations. And this is where it was really important that we did that planning up front to make sure that the type of content or type of data that we were capturing in the migration would be stored in an appropriate field stores so that we could index it with Solr later. You can see the types over here. We have integers and strings and full text. And we do have a couple of special fields at the top doing some aggregated or grouped data up here. And if you don't do the planning for migrations up front, you're going to have a really tough time when it comes to search and getting this part right. For example, if you migrate dates over and for some reason you select them as a plain text field instead of a date field, you of course are not going to be able to expose them as a date-based field index for Solr. And that's going to lead to problems when you want to have really rich search experiences like we're going to take a look at here in a second. And we're going to take a look at 3 different searches that we enabled for the NBER website. One's going to be the site-wide search. The second's going to be an automatic search. And the third one's going to be a manually entered search that is tailored by the content editors. All right, so let's start with the site-wide search here on the NBER.org. So I'm going to search for an example term here. enter. We have a page. We can filter by content type. Just do working paper. Some nice looking results here. And this page is generated entirely in React.js. The header and footer are still in the Drupal theme, but the middle part, from search results down to the pager, all the way to the bottom, is handled by a React.js application. And we built the backend services in Drupal, and React, the React application is talking to those backend services in order to make the query requests to get the Solr search results into the page. And we did this for a couple of reasons. One is for performance. Since we were doing AJAX requests and sending text over the wire, the performance is far better than what we would get out of the box with views. The second reason is because we wanted to establish a pattern with JavaScript that we could reuse around the site for our other search needs. And the third reason is we wanted to avoid using views to build our search interfaces and our search pages. And the reason for that is if you've ever had to use views to make a search of any kind that has exposed filters and maybe a layout similar to this one, you know how difficult it can be to have to create all the different views templates to get this working and get some of the search or get some of the functionality out of the forms that you see here to get them to play nicely. And of course, getting a nice snappy response out of views. We opted not to go that route just to avoid all those pain points with views. Views is a great module, but when it comes to creating these sorts of interfaces, we tend to leave it up to React.js and the client side to really make this go as fast as possible for the end user. And since we're using a client-side application to handle the search, as you can see, the URL does update if we were to change some of the options here. Let's just select an author. You'll see that the URL changes to reflect that. So every time that we do a search, it is being cached by the web server or the reverse proxy server. So all users are getting a nice, snappy, responsive search interface on NBER.org when they come and use the site-wide search. So at this point, once we had the site-wide search established, we were able to take parts of this React application and break it down and repurpose it to other kinds of searches within the site. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that here. If I go back to our backend interface, our admin interface, go to paragraph types. We actually have a lot of paragraphs on this site, and about 24 of them make up different, what I would refer to as automatic or pre-canned search result components. So if I look at, for example, books and chapter listing, there's no fields on it. And that's another one, a data set listing. Again, there's not going to be any fields on it. And that's because we're using paragraph types in this way to provide paragraph option on node forms to drop in searches that are particular to that specific paragraph type. So in the instance of books and chapters, if I was to drop that on a content page, we would get the books and chapters search results. So if I were to just navigate on the NBER website back to books and chapters, this is a paragraph that holds the React component for books and chapters, and the React code is actually the same as a site-wide search, and it's the same as all the other searches around the site. We're just changing the request URL that's being made to the Drupal controller that's making the request to the Solr server to get the results back. And again, as you can see, we have all the same options available to us. We can go and select what different taxonomy and the different facets we have up here. We can do authors. We can even do a type ahead. We have all the same facilities available to us as the other, the global site-wide search. And all it took to do this was to put the React.js script initialization code in our paragraph twig template. We didn't have to do anything special here other than put into our paragraph template, put the React.js code and the HTML container it's expecting to bind to. I'll just create an example page to demonstrate what I'm talking about here. So if I just go add a new listing page, we'll call this DrupalCon 2021 test page. We have a list of components here. We're just going to use books and chapters listing. You can see there's no field. So when I save this, this will put the same exact search on the page that we were just looking at, as you can see here. So we can do this for any number of pages that we want to add searches to. As I mentioned, we have a dozen or two pre-built searches that are just like this, but there's a third example as well. And that's the one where we allow the content editors to actually tailor the kind of search component they want to put on the page. And we did that again by using a paragraph type, but this time the paragraph type has fields on it to allow the content editor to actually manipulate the search parameters that are applied before the user gets to interact with it. And let's go take a look at what I mean by that. So I will once again create another page in Drupal. Add content. Components, and this time we will select generic listing. And as you can see, we have a lot of fields here to pick from, and I'll just go through really quick. We can actually name the title of the component, so we'll do DrupalCon 2021 test search components, test results, and if there's no results, we can actually control that text too. Sorry, there were no results. We can actually refer to a node if we want. Let's go ahead and select an example one. I don't know if it's going to produce any results for us or not, but let's just try to find a working paper. Okay, great. We'll just select this one and see what we get here. So what this is going to do is perform the same search that we were looking at with the site-wide search and the books and chapters and the working papers listing page search, and other searches that are similar. But in this case, this is going to say, okay, before you execute, or when you execute the query, make sure we only get results that are related to or have a relationship to this particular node. And then down here, we can say, okay, also limit the results to only being articles or only being working papers or only being chapters. And we can also apply the same filters for user or a taxonomy term, but we'll leave those blank for now. I'll just publish this page. Right. So we see our component on the page, and there are no results. I probably don't have enough Solr items in my local server to produce anything. So if I go back and just edit that again, we'll take that content reference right off there and see what we get. Just take that off there. Okay, great. So now you can see we do actually get some results on the page here. And this was a really important step for the content authors on NBER, because now they can create any page they want anywhere on the website and drop a search component in that is, as you could see from the paragraph form there, configurable in an infinite number of ways. And this was really useful because we couldn't foresee the number of searches that we would need to build to facilitate, all the content that's in the website. So this provided the subject matter experts at NBER a way to really kind of create all these one-off pages in the sites in different sections, and then add a specific, a very super specific search on there with a very specific result set that's already predetermined. And the user can still go through and select and search through the result set here. This is a little more contained within the parameters to what the content editor wants you to search against. So I think we're just about at time here. So I'm going to stop the talk at this point and say thank you to the DrupalCon organizers for helping us through our first presentation this year. And an extra special thank you to all the fine folks in the Drupal official Drupal Slack migration channel that really helped me along the way figure out how migrations work in Drupal 8. And thank you to everybody in the audience who attended our session today. And now I just want to open the floor for any Q&A that you may have for us for this talk.
All right, we did it. Thank you, everybody.
Hey, I think we're a little over, so yeah, we can take questions and conversations back to our booth. I know there was a lot to cover here. I do see some pretty good questions in the chat that we can take over there.
All right, thank you, everybody. We hope you've enjoyed DrupalCon this week. We hope to see you at the next one. And in the more immediate term, please join us at the booth for a follow-up conversation. Thanks again. We really enjoyed it, and we hope you did as well.
Yep. Thank you. Bye.